we have eviscerated our industrial base as a result of the fiat currency experiment.
Too much, yes.
And now there are national security administration layers that recognize that.
Yes, and they have for some time. This is a decade, at least a decade.
And they say, to hell with whatever, centralized money monopoly wants to do. This is for shit got real, basically, right? Like we have to actually defend and produce and be able to fight and win wars again.
Yes.
So weakness maybe has been exposed through these recent conflicts, and now intelligence agencies inside of this country understand that and are looking to refortify the productive and even war-making capacity of this country.
I think there's a war-making capacity side to it too, and there's also people that understand that the fiat system has led to the worst wealth inequality in 150 years.
Right.
And regardless of which side you rooted for, everyone can agree that this country is getting politically unstable, which is what happens,
of course,
100% of the time when you take out the middle class.
Of course.
And we take out the middle and working class, that's what happens. And how did you do that? You did that by separating and financializing, right? The energy from the money. So you've got to reconnect.
Are you telling me there might be some adults in charge?
Not in charge. But the adults in charge the people in charge some of them have adult
advisors
that understand this 100%. And so the game theory has changed around this for national political stability, for bringing back the middle and working class, for defense-based reestablishment. All of these things are pointing to a neutral reserve asset. Right. And then you go, okay, well, it's gold or it's Bitcoin.
Right. Right.
And, Bitcoin, I think, has gone from eye roll, laugh in this sentence a year ago, maybe even 6 months ago, but certainly a year ago, 2 years ago forward.
Oh, yeah.
There's still a lot of eye rolling around it, I think, especially among sort of the geopolitical pros. Mm-hmm. But I don't think there should be. Treasury is talking about how to use stable coins to create balance sheet, basically, for T-bills to finance deficits. Paul Ryan, former Speaker of the House, VP candidate, op-ed about how stable coins could be used to create demand for T-bills. Trump saying, Bitcoin is the new oil, reportedly. The strategic reserve, all of these things, you can see clear to the thought process, which is, in my opinion, simply a version of what the U.S. did in 73, right? In October 73 to April 74, oil went up 400% in 6 months. Sheikh Yamani of Saudi Arabia gave an interview in 2010 in which he said there was a Bilderberg Group meeting. Put our tinfoil hats back on. Bilderberg Group meeting in October 73 in Salzbaden, Sweden, that Henry Kissinger attended. And it was agreed that oil was going to go up 400%. You can find the interview online. He gave it to John Defterios at CNN International in 2010. Did Yamani. And what that oil price did by moving up that way was it effectively made oil big enough to back the dollar, to back the U.S. deficits, to recycle. Crazy. And so when I hear Trump, and it dawned on me recently, in light of the strategic reserve and Paul Ryan saying this, and the Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee. Do people understand who's on the TBAC? That is every too big to fail bank that would never want, they line up the biggest enemies of gold from 5 or 8 years ago, and they are the TBAC. Those are the American banks. And they wrote a supplemental report 2.5-3 weeks ago talking about how can we use stable coins possibly to increase Treasury demand, T-bill demand. So there's something has changed in that sea change. And I think possibly what they might be looking at when you hear Trump say Bitcoin's a new oil is the Treasury TBAC report has a chart. Here's the market cap of, they use crypto. I prefer to only use Bitcoin. You get the point. Yeah. Here's the market cap of crypto. Here's the market cap of stable coins. Here's how many T-bills stable coins have bought. And it's linear. That's how they're looking at it. And so it makes me think, when you think about it that way, in the context of the political stability issues that that you need to address, the national defense issues you need to address, the game theory's turned on its head. Holy cow. Bitcoin isn't a threat that it's rising. It needs to go up faster so that we have more balance sheet capacity, and so that our people, as we reinflate to reshore all this stuff, because it is going to be inflationary.
Yeah.
Like, that's not a bad thing to compensate your people, to keep them whole on a real basis while that happens. Because look, if you make us all buy bonds, and this is how a lot of people are game theory, make everybody buy bonds, then surprise them with inflation when we reshore, then what? How can I afford to buy any of this stuff coming off the line? I'm broke. You stole all my money. Now do it with Bitcoin or with gold. Encourage the people. If I own Bitcoin, Bitcoin's going to go up with the inflation, with the money printing. Now we rebuild the factory. It's like Henry Ford paying his people enough to buy the cars coming off the line. It's this. And like I said, gold could do it too. There's a competitive element with gold, right? Where, hey, they did gold, we can do Bitcoin, we can one up them. There's elements of that. They could certainly do the same. But
to that point, right? If you're going to revitalize the industrial base of the United States, people have to have a sound savings. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
You're going to get done, and everyone's going to be broke, and all those businesses are going to go bankrupt. There's going to be no demand.
You'll be dealing with a social revolt and all the instability associated with lack of savings and impoverishment.
And this is what the bond market doesn't get yet. That's why I say it's going to happen again. I think the most variant view out there is the bond market is going to get killed on a real basis. You'll get every dime you're promised. But the only way this works, it's a debt restructuring. Go back to what we talked about, right? We spent $30 trillion. A lot of it should be zeroed out. We got no value out of it.
Which is the market working, right?
That's because the market working.
Aren't governments actually bankrupt? So shouldn't their debt get wiped out? This
is how you can restructure. Like, that's the only way that makes sense. You can't impoverish your people. Certainly not now, after the last, with all this debt. You can't put all the debt on them, financially repress them. There's not going to be any demand when we bring all the stuff back. Then what?
So this is an existential issue for the country, basically.
Yes.
Like, you can't impoverish people. You have to produce stuff. You have to be ready to defend.
It gets back to the initial point, which is inflate or default.
Yeah.
This is just the manifestation of, like, let Bitcoin go. Let gold go. The beautiful thing about it, unlike oil, right? You think about inflating oil 400%. People starved all around the world, right? That drove up food prices, coups, political instability, just inflation, awful. If the price of gold or Bitcoin, they're not used for anything. They aren't. They're useless.
That's right. Yeah, they're money.
Beautiful. If the price of gold goes up 1,000%, 400% in 6 months, who starves? Nobody.
Right.
Nobody.
Right.
You're not impacting any industrial processes. You're not we saw 2011 with the Arab Spring.
It's actually the opposite.
No, exactly.
Yeah, less people starve when the purchasing power of money skyrockets.
Think about what the Chinese are doing versus what we're doing, right? Their home prices are going down, and people over here are like, oh, it's disaster. And it's not good for the banking system. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But in a country with a closed capital account that's only open through gold, by the way, on a limited basis, but essentially a closed capital account, state-owned bank, state-owned property developer, who cares if the home price goes down? Like this guy's asset is they're two sides of the same balance sheet. Doesn't matter. But the point is this: when you store wealth in houses, sooner or later you run into a political problem. If you store wealth in non-useful stuff, gold, Bitcoin, people can afford houses, they can afford food, they don't riot. People with shelter and cheap housing and cheap food, cheap good food,
they don't riot.
They don't riot.
Yeah.
You're politically stable. And so the Chinese government spent, this is ironic as heck. Last 20 years, Chinese government's been encouraging, the communist country has been telling their people to buy gold. And our country's been telling our people not to buy gold by their actions up until recently. Gold goes up a bunch, great. Again, people, if it makes home prices go down, there's going to be winners, losers. But ultimately, societally,
it's a win.
it's a win.
Yeah.
It's a stability. You're now playing for stability, for national survival. And that's ultimately like, that's the rule change that has happened that DOD and intelligence gets on at least a pretty good level, that Wall Street, I think, still the average investor, I don't think fully grasps yet. They're still in the, hey, I want to flip it for a month and I've got to make my number, this year and all that. Like that game's over, I think.
Let's just assume that the argument you're laying out here is correct, right? The United States is doing this. The adults are advising the air quotes adults that are in charge, and we are actually going to do this, right? We're going to revitalize the U.S. industrial productive base. We're going to go onto I don't want to say gold or Bitcoin standard, but we're at least going to make it accessible to the middle class. We're going to rebuild the middle class and rebuild our productive capacity, and then rebuild our ability to defend ourselves as a nation. Let's say all that is true for argument's sake. What is the competitive response? What are other countries, if all this is happening, let's just assume this is all happening, what is China doing? What is Russia doing? What are our other peers at a national level doing in response to this change?
I think you can see what China's doing, right? Right now, they sell more to the Belt and Road than they do to US, EU, and Japan combined, right? So, as Larry Summers said, what they get from the Americans, what they get from the Chinese, is an airport, and what they get from the Americans is a lecture. That was what an emerging market leader told Larry Summers either earlier this year or last year. So China is going to continue to reinvest sort of around the world. China has its own problem, which is demographic in nature. A lot of Asia has that same problem.
Right. Population is supposed to decline by like 50% over the next
year. It's incredible. And so what they have the same friction problem, which is you have to innovate fast enough to prevent the collapse of the system. And there's a lot to suggest when you look at David P. Goldman at the Asia Times is one of my favorite people to read. Anything he writes that I can see, I'll read. He's very balanced. And he highlighted the world is not paying attention to the pace and scale at which they are implementing and have implemented industrial robots, AI, et cetera, throughout the country. Automation. They are automating at a frantic pace. I had a friend tell me that, most of the major cities in China, you drive an electric car, you pull in, they lift the, like we do into oil change shops, except it's battery change shops. Boom, boom. They pull the battery out. They give you a new battery. You drive off. They take the battery. They recycle it.
Wow.
Yeah. So they are I think, running headlong into automation, understanding they have that issue. They have a huge water issue too, which I think they also, it's a existential threat along with demographics. And so I think they've got a lot to do there. I think they also could probably continue to invest around the world. I think we probably continue to butt heads with them in current areas of critical raw materials. But, to the extent you're settling in a neutral reserve asset, it's about productivity. It's about competing. It's about, competing on the merits of your society and your leadership. Sometimes I feel better about that than others. What does Russia do? I think Russia wants to be left alone. I think they want to continue developing because, the thing we never see in our media is exactly what living standards have done in Russia since Putin's been president. Yeah. And it's up and to the right. People are like, oh, these, he has 80% approval ratings because it's all fraudulent. Well, some of it's probably fraudulent, but some of it's probably that the living standards have gone unbelievable since he's been president.
By embracing capitalism, right?
By and large.
Yeah.
Yeah. Certainly relative to what they were
the past.
doing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I think they want to be left alone. They've built up sort of an autarkic society where they can pretty much stand alone. I think they want to, we just saw them hook up this giant gas pipeline to China that's been underway. Again, things aren't perfect between them and China, but there's a lot of land and not a lot of people and very mutual interest, particularly when you have one side us pressuring them both in an existential manner.
Right.
So it's possible, like, look, you back off the pressure. We start actually developing ourselves. The Chinese have their own issues to worry about. Russia has demographic issues of their own.
So more insular kind of defensive posturing.
I think more defensive posturing and I think decentralized, right?
Yeah.
When you talk, I think where the world is going is multi-currency energy commodity pricing, net settled in gold, Bitcoin.
Gold or Bitcoin. Yeah.
And in that world, currencies reorder
Right.
on a balance of payments fundamentals. And unlike on relative interest rates, the US dollar is the dirtiest dirty shirt on a balance of payments fundamental. The UK's second. EU's like right around neutral. The Chinese might actually be more now in terms of surplus, but the Japanese, Chinese, you would see the yen and yuan rise meaningfully, which, by the way, we've spent the last year and a half going over to China saying, stop sending us so much cheap stuff. The answer's simple. Let the dollar fall against the yuan. The stuff won't be so cheap. How do you do that? Neutral reserve asset. Markets will take care of the rest. So I'm optimistic that could lead to a system or a world where every country has their own sort of sovereign energy policy, right? Basically, how much, if oil is sort of I think that's a system where you would get, you'd have a neutral reserve asset where energy is deflationary over time in that neutral reserve asset. In other words, the price of energy goes down over time relative to that, which allows investment, allows sovereign choices around, what do we want for green policy, relative to our national oil endowment and what have you. So
lowers time preference across the board.
And war gets really expensive. Now, of course, everyone says, well, first thing you do is go off the gold standard, which, okay, the Bitcoin side's a little different, I suppose. It's harder to go off that once you're on that in theory. I
wonder what the cost of defecting. I don't know. That's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I haven't thought a lot about the game theory of that on the other side, to be honest. Jason Lowry's done a lot of interesting work in software.
I was going to ask you if you're subscribing to the software thesis, because we're definitely flirting with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed when you have someone of his caliber, pedigree, seat, to think that this kind of thing isn't being talked about in high cert. And again, that book was published over 3 years ago, or his first sort of appearance on Twitter. Was his Jerry Maguire mission statement was posted over 3 years ago on Twitter. Then X now, and then he wrote the book a little after, right? So it's been being thought about for quite some time.
Yes,
these types of power dynamics. And you can get lost in what's that world look like. But I think it's important not to lose the biggest thing, which is the whole, gold and Bitcoin aren't going to be allowed to thrive because they undermine the fiat system. Fiat system's dead. I shouldn't be so flip.
Death throes.
The fiat system has issues.
Yeah.
The bond, they won't let gold and Bitcoin go because the bond market is dead on a real basis. That's what I should say. On a real basis, it has to be.
Yeah.
And so if it is, and more importantly, if the bond market is the millstone preventing national competitiveness, political stability, and defense preparedness, who do you want to bet on? Right? You want to bet on the bond market being allowed to stay a market at the expense of political stability, national defense preparedness, and national unity? Well, come on.
Because then if you lose the latter,
there is no bond market.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what this is understood.
Yeah.
This is understood.
If you enjoyed this clip, click here for the full episode and here for more just like it. Also, like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money and subscribe to stay connected. Thank you.